And so, how do you feel about realignment because of all the history you did and where you started with the MacGuffin with 8 teams, and now here we are with this is beyond what I think anybody thought college football would be like even 20 years ago.
Yeah. I think realignment is something that is impossible to predict right now because the things are kept so under wraps. I don't remember a single person calling UCLA, USC before that news dropped, or Oklahoma, Texas. Kind of feels like those two things hit just, the day of. Colorado, I feel like there might have been a little bit more foresight because I remember hearing the reports that they were a bit of a flight risk. But I mean, realignment's nothing new. And all you're looking at, in my opinion, is just a shift in where the power in college football lies. And especially, I think the biggest and most dramatic fallout would be if the Pac 12 conference falls completely. You're just going to see those West Coast teams start to drop off. I mean, looking back to the origins of college football, you realize, hey, guess what? The East Coast, and the ACC, that region used to be a power in college football because that's where it began. And you look at what the ACC kind of has, and not even just the ACC, but the teams in that region, and you look at what they've done recently. No offense to Virginia Tech, it just hasn't been there. It just hasn't been there. And the teams that have succeeded in the ACC, it's the teams that are further south. So you're talking regionality, you're talking about the power shifting. This is nothing new to college football per se. It just has never been quite as seismic as the moves we're kind of seeing right now.
One thing I find fascinating about college realignment is people's opinions are very age related or generational, right? Because I think the older generations, they look at this and they're like, well, geography. Who wants to travel from Los Angeles, to New Jersey to play a Big Ten football game? Where I think the younger generation, people that probably are more willing to hop on a plane and travel across the country for something like that, they don't see that as an obstacle. And the other thing that is kind of a dated thought process, in my opinion, is the market size. Back when cable TV kind of ruled all, market was very relevant, but now I think it's more brand driven as opposed to how big a TV market is. Because with streaming and everything else, I mean, like throw markets out the window. The brands are what sells. That's where the money is, and then I think too, when it comes like the Big Ten, especially, I think on the periphery of it all, you have academics, and now we'll see how long that lasts as all this kind of progresses over time. But I know that I think every school in the Big Ten, sans Nebraska, is what do they call? Is it AAU? Is that the term, or it's some sort of academic, classification? And I think Nebraska is the only team that doesn't fall in that category. And so, they've sort of, put themselves up on a pedestal as far as who they'll take academically. I think there'll come a time where, they're going to have to decide if they're going to stick to that or not. And I wonder if 10 years down the road, if this looks like, instead of, the Power Five, it looks like the AFC and the NFC, the Big Ten and the SEC, two super conferences. And by super conference, I mean 20 plus teams or something each, and then a playoff transpiring from there. Now, who knows what that could look like? It's just, I like you said, I think all bets are off as far as predicting what's going to happen because it's kind of the Wild West right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's unfortunately I think unfortunately, but the reality is a lot in college football is moving towards the professionalization of the sport. And I think the argument isn't necessarily whether or not it's heading that direction. It's how far they're going to go in that direction. So yes, the extreme of that I think would be AFC, NFC, literally just SEC and Big Ten around the world, and then there's a bunch of these smaller colleges, trying to stay alive. I do think that there's a scenario where the dust kind of settles and the Pac-12 is able to regroup with, SMU, Rice, and San Diego State with their, whatever teams they have left. And then they're just going to be a slightly lower conference, and you're going to have the Big Ten and SEC still there. Because I think one of the hesitations that those conferences have had is making that next leap to adding more teams. They're kind of the teams that are already in that conference. I'm thinking about your Vanderbilts and your Northwesterns. They're worried, we don't really want our stuff to be diluted from here. So kind of in the context of the SEC, it seems like the whole conference might not necessarily be in favor of expanding further because those teams that realize they're on the bottom rung are going to start to get, I think, cold feet in those conferences.
And what kind of an effect do you think it's going to have on play now? Because these schools are obviously looking at their moves that are coming up, all the NIL deals that are out there as well. I mean, NIL has been a big paradigm shift in college sports and the schools that have the money that are able to put together these programs to pay. I don't know if you saw that Tua Tagovailoa's brother, who's at Maryland, was offered like almost $2 million to go to an SEC school or whatever it was, something like that. And those kinds of things are going to happen. And do you think that the realignment and all of these shifting of schools is affecting anything that's happening now? Like, are players going to wait to go to schools because they're waiting for them to go to another place? You know what I mean? Like all the transfer and everything, is that still very much in flux until this conference realignment is at least somewhat in a concrete state?
I think the sense that I've gotten from players, and especially like the sense that was at Pac 12 Media Day when I was there, which is kind of the closest I've gotten to firsthand seeing players react to that sort of stuff. Like I saw Caleb Williams field a question about, ooh, USC going to the Big Ten. Like, what are your thoughts on, leaving the conference or whatever? And it seems like it's kind of the same sentiment from the players and coaches. They don't really care. They just want to play ball. Like, obviously, I think for recruits, that might be a big thing where the types of teams they're playing. Like, if you're a guy that, grew up in California, you're saying, hey, I want to play California schools, and maybe USC going to the Big Ten isn't the best. But people have different preferences. If somebody's like, I want to play for a team that can, win a national championship, they say, oh, going to the Big Ten's better for us, so I'll go to USC or something like that. For the most part, I don't think that that's something that plays too big of a factor for these kids coming out of high school. And for guys in the transfer portal, um, I don't necessarily think that's probably at the top of their list of things because there's so much else like NIL that I think we'll go into that. And I think NIL has actually done a pretty decent job. It's still obviously very messy, but kind of self-regulating with these schools for the budgets that they have, and realizing, hey, if we're going to fork out all this NIL money, we're not going to have the money to build a weight room this year or something like that. So it's actually kind of balanced its way well. And something that's been encouraging to me about the transfer portal and NIL kind of as a combo is you've seen lots of different teams have success with it. Like you've got Florida State having a lot of success with the transfer portal. That's kind of as expected. It's one of those schools where you think that happened. But you've also got a team like SMU and Louisville and Charlotte having a lot of success with the transfer portal. Just because of the coaches they bring there. So I think something that's been encouraging to me about the landscape shifting, that's giving me faith it'll work out, is sort of just the variety of teams that have been able to kind of take advantage of it.
So, Coach, before you get in there, Tyler, so am I hearing that you're kind of you're not necessarily not a fan of all of this, but you definitely feel hesitant about this because is it taking away some sense of purity of the game that you fell in love with, or what is your hesitation about where this is headed and how you're needing to sort of feel reassured with some of the things that are happening with NIL and the transfer portal?
Yeah, I think my biggest concern is losing the regionality of college football as far as realignment. That's my number one concern about the shifting landscape. With NIL, I think it's definitely opened a lot of avenues for players to just get basically paid by boosters, which was not the intention. The intention was like, hey, look at a player like Johnny Manziel. They should be able to profit off of being Johnny Manziel, stuff like that. And so I feel like the NIL has been a little bit of a monster that, they kind of let out of the cage. There weren't enough guardrails in place. I do think they're making good things happen. The transfer portal, I honestly have loved how it's been. I think it's nice that recently they added a little thing where you can't transfer twice unless you get like approved by the NCAA. But I think it's really upgraded the competitiveness in college football because now, especially quarterbacks is the position I look to. Good quarterbacks are not being backups anymore in college football. They are just jumping ship and going somewhere that needs a quarterback. And you're seeing a lot of places where we would have been seeing significantly worse quarterback play. We're seeing significantly better. And another great pro of NIL is great quarterbacks are willing to stay another year because they're going to be getting great money. And not just quarterbacks, great players are willing to stay. Look at Jared Verse at Florida State. He was a projected first-round pick, sticks around because he's going to get some NIL money, and that takes a little bit of the pressure off of going and getting that rookie deal in the NFL. So those are some good things, but there's obviously, I think, bad that comes a little bit of bad with change.
Yeah, one thing that, as a Notre Dame fan about NIL, that a lot of their fans get upset about is they're not willing to offer the bag of cash up front. They're not willing to buy recruits, and there's fans that get really upset about it, and they're like, we've got to get on the same level as a lot of these other schools. We're never going to be able to recruit at the level we want to recruit at if we're not willing to play the NIL game as aggressively as everyone else, and they've sort of good, bad, or otherwise taken the high road on NIL, if you will. And now they have NIL programs, but it's more of a you come in here, you get established, there will be opportunities, as opposed to we're going to give you seven figures just to come here, unproven or whatever else. And what's nice is they did, and of course the name escapes me, but they did just get a commitment from a linebacker from California to beat out USC in Ohio State for him. And the reports are that I believe it was USC came in late and offered seven figures. Like, come on, man, let's go. And he still chose Notre Dame, which is really exciting because those are the types of guys that Notre Dame has been getting beat out on by the Ohio States and USCs of the world for years and years. And so to see them maybe start to turn the corner, especially if they're not, they're just not outbidding them, but they're maybe just out recruiting them. That's been exciting. And I'm sure that there's things that are getting promised in some way, shape, or form. I'm not naive to that, but it's definitely been interesting to see the Notre Dame fan perspective of NIL based off at least the public personification of how they're willing to handle things.
Yeah, that's the reality of the landscape right now is you can take the high ground and you can take the high road or what high road, not high ground. This isn't Revenge of the Sith, but you
Nice.
can take that, but until the NCAA puts those guidelines in place, I mean, you can't hate the player, hate the game because it's legal, it's allowed right now. So it's the Wild West out there.
And Notre Dame's kind of a wild card in a lot of this because they don't have a natural conference that they are aligned to, and they love their independence. I'm sure, Coach, you can attest to that. And they sort of have used that as a way to differentiate themselves. They have their own media deal with NBC, all of that. And they're not going to be able to sit it out a lot longer, or they're going to be somewhere on the outside looking in. And I don't think, as a program and a brand, they can really afford that. So they're going to have to compromise their morals at some point.
I think it'll be interesting to see what happens because most Notre Dame fans, like you said, they are very prideful about their independence and very serious about wanting to remain independent. And it seems like most of the people in power at Notre Dame feel the same way. Me personally, based off geography and everything else, I mean, I would love to see them in the Big Ten. I think that would be wonderful. I mean, just there's a lot of natural rivalries geographically. I mean, they already play USC. USC's coming in. Obviously, Michigan is a long-standing rivalry, and they haven't played in a few years, but that's a big one. Purdue's an in-state rivalry. They've had a lot of battles with Michigan State. I mean, there's just a ton of natural rivalries. But I just think that they feel like it's better off for them financially, at least at this point in time, to remain independent. And unless my prediction is this: unless something comes along with the playoff, where the powers that be decide you have to be in a conference to qualify for the playoff, I think that's literally the only thing that could happen that would push them into a conference. I don't know if anything else would do it.
Yeah, more power to Notre Dame. I love them being independent. I absolutely love it. I think they should stay there as long as they can. I think one of the most annoying things to me about the current landscape of college football is conference championship games have just become like more just questionable than anything. You just get like a lot of weird rematches or games that don't seem to matter as much, like the Michigan Purdue game this last year in the Big Ten title game and the Georgia LSU game. Yes, the games themselves might have been entertaining, but it's like, what are the stakes here if these guys are already, pretty much clinched for the playoffs? So more power to Notre Dame. I think it's great what they're doing. And you look at their schedule, you can't say anything about their schedule. It's one of the toughest in college football, and they go 11-1 with that schedule. They're in the playoffs. So more power to Notre Dame. I love what they're doing, and I honestly am rooting for them to stay independent because it seems like it's just like a big middle finger to the realignment. Like, we don't care. We're staying out here.
A little bit of anti-establishment in you, man. I love it. I love it. So